My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how I lost everything and quietly built a billion-dollar empire no one in my family saw coming. It all began with a message in the family group chat. Emergency meeting. Saturday. 6 p.m. At home. The whole family hopes Rachel will come so we can find a solution to the current situation. The wording alone made my skin crawl. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. And I could practically hear my mother's voice in that carefully sanitized phrasing. The current situation, not your situation. Not something they wanted to understand. Something they needed to fix, manage, control. I was sitting in my Seattle studio apartment when the message came through. The room was dim, my only light the pale blue from the screen of my laptop. Steam rose from the chipped mug of coffee on my desk. I couldn't afford replacements for anything frivolous, not yet. I lived humbly, by choice. No designer labels, no doorman, no hardwood floors. Just a woman and a vision that everyone thought would collapse under its own weight. But even then, I smiled when I read the message. Because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I was no longer the daughter begging for approval. I was the woman quietly building the future of education. And Saturday? It was going to be unforgettable. I flew from Seattle to Connecticut the next morning. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just booked a red-eye, rented a decade-old Prius at the airport, and drove straight to my childhood home, a mansion with white columns and long driveways, every inch of it screaming generational wealth and emotional vacancy. I didn't park in the driveway. That was reserved for Dad's Lexus and Brooklyn's new custom Range Rover. I left the Prius on the curb, like I didn't belong. And in their eyes, I didn't. I was 2 minutes late when I rang the doorbell. Mom opened it, lips drawn tight, dressed in her usual pastel Carolina Herrera, and said, "Rachel. You're late." "We don't live by your time zone anymore," I replied, stepping past her without waiting for permission. Inside, the living room had been transformed into a war room. Whiteboard. Bottled water. Laptops open like shields. And at the head of the table, my father. Thomas Carter. Managing partner of Carter and Holt Consulting. A man who could build a Fortune 500 merger in his sleep but couldn't look his daughter in the eye when she needed emotional support. Next to him, my sister Brooklyn, the family's golden child, her husband Jason, always smirking like he was giving a TED talk nobody asked for. And of course, Aunt Ellen, the designated family empath, holding a notepad like she was about to offer a diagnosis. "Rachel," Dad began, voice cold and rehearsed. "We're all here because we're concerned. You've been spiraling for some time." Spiraling. That word. I didn't flinch. I just sat down in the velvet chair facing all of them like I was about to be cross-examined. "You left a top-tier job. Threw away your future. And for what? A tech fantasy?" Jason chimed in, adjusting his collar. I almost laughed. "You're not making revenue," Brooklyn added. "You're not married. You're not stable. You could have had what Mason has." Mason. The cousin they never shut up about. Regional executive at Wells Fargo. Owns a home. Kids. A golden retriever probably. And me? I lived in a rented 500-square-foot studio with thrifted furniture and a team of 5 engineers changing the face of public education. But they wouldn't know. Because they never asked. "I'm not failing," I said softly. "I'm building." Jason scoffed. "We've reviewed what's publicly available. There's no traction. No investment. No path to profitability." "Interesting," I said, tilting my head. "You mean the same company you pitched to last month? Wild Tree Capital? You submitted a proposal, didn't you?" Jason's face twitched. Brooklyn blinked rapidly. "Yeah," I said, leaning forward. "They rejected it. Do you know why? Because it lacked audited financials, showed inflated user data, and failed to differentiate from the competition. Jason's voice cracked. How do you know that? Because WildTree is a subsidiary of LumenEdge Ventures, I said, slowly. And I own LumenEdge. The silence that followed was the kind you could bottle and sell. Dad stiffened. Mom's wine glass shook slightly. Brooklyn looked like she'd seen a ghost. Jason just froze. You called my work a tech fantasy, I continued. While trying to get money from the very empire you didn't even know I built. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Grant, my CFO. The Business Monthly article is live. I looked at the room. In 10 minutes, your idea of who I am is going to change. And I meant every word. Because I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the architect of a billion-dollar revolution, and they were about to see it in real time. 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. I sat at that long, gleaming mahogany table, legs crossed, arms relaxed, while the rest of the room waited in confused tension, not yet realizing the foundations beneath their judgment were about to crack wide open. Brooklyn's phone lit up first. I saw it in her peripheral vision, the small gasp she tried to swallow, the sudden rigidity in her spine. Then Jason's buzzed. He snatched it from the table and scrolled quickly. His fingers froze mid-scroll. And finally, my father. He didn't even pick up his phone. He simply looked at me. For the first time in years, not with disappointment, not with condescension, but with something dangerously close to fear. Brooklyn finally broke the silence. Rachel, why are you on the homepage of Business Monthly? I turned toward her slowly. You mean the article titled, Meet the Woman Revolutionizing American Education Through AI? Jason's eyes darted between the screen and me. Is this a prank? No, I said. It's called Edinova. My company. My platform. My life's work for the past 2 years. Dad reached for his phone then. Finally. His hands were shaking. I stood, walked to my tote bag, and pulled out a sleek tablet. I tapped the screen once. The Edinova interface glowed to life. Edinova is an AI-powered learning ecosystem, I said calmly, projecting it onto the living room smart TV. We personalize education pathways in real time for students, based on behavior, cognition patterns, even stress indicators. It's currently being implemented in over 80 public schools across California, Oregon, and Texas. No one said a word. I swiped to the next slide. This is our growth chart. Over the last 6 months, student performance improved by 42% on average. Not theory. Data. I turned back to face them. Last week, we closed a $240 million funding round in 11 days. This morning, we finalized a $130 million acquisition of a Canadian digital learning firm. And this article? I gestured to the screen. It's only the beginning. Mom sat perfectly still. Her glass of Chardonnay untouched, lip trembling just slightly. Jason looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I helped him. Oh, and Jason, I added. The VC firm that rejected your last pitch? That was us. Edinova Capital. We created our own investment arm 6 months ago. Your numbers were sloppy. Your market projections inflated. And the email where you called me a delusional founder with a savior complex? I tilted my head. Grant forwarded it to me. Jason turned gray. Brooklyn blinked hard, her voice barely audible. You built all this? I didn't just build it, I said. I did it without a single one of you asking what I was working on. Because you were too busy feeling embarrassed. Dad finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? I looked him dead in the eye. Because you never listened when I did. And I wasn't going to beg to be understood. Silence. Aunt Ellen, ever the family moderator, offered a meek Rachel, "This is astonishing. We had no idea." "That's the point," I replied. I walked to the kitchen and opened the old blue tin where Mom always kept almond cookies. Still there. Still hers. I took one, bit into it, and turned back toward them. "You all saw me as a failure," I said through a brittle laugh. "Because I didn't dress it in Chanel or parade it down Fifth Avenue. But guess what? Failure doesn't usually lead Forbes to call you a visionary." I grabbed a glass of water and walked back into the center of the room. "You didn't ask what I was building. You just assumed it wasn't worth your time because I didn't look successful. But I didn't need your version of success. I needed to build my own." Brooklyn's voice shook. "Rachel, I'm sorry. I didn't know." I offered a cool smile. No one did. That was the advantage. Jason looked like he wanted to speak, but I cut in before he could. "And before you ask," I added, "yes, you're welcome to reapply to Edinova Capital. In 6 months. But maybe this time, leave out the part where you say women in tech are an investor risk." I grabbed my coat from the armrest. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came because I wanted you to see the difference between doubting someone and simply not deserving to be part of their story." As I reached the door, my phone buzzed again. This time it was CNN. A producer asking for an interview. Monday morning. Live. Perfect. Right after my meeting with the California Department of Education. I opened the front door and paused, glancing back over my shoulder at the stunned faces of the people who once told me I was wasting my life. "I'm still Rachel," I said. "Just not the Rachel you imagined." Outside, a sleek black sedan waited at the curb. My driver stepped out, umbrella in hand. I didn't look back again. The next morning, my phone screen glowed like a bonfire. Missed calls. Dozens of messages. Every notification pulled from a part of my past I'd long ago buried: classmates, coworkers, distant cousins, mentors who had ghosted me the second I said I was leaving consulting. But 4 names stood out. Mom. "Leah, please call me back. I didn't know it was this big." Brooklyn. "You should have told me from the beginning. I'm so sorry. You're better than any of us ever gave you credit for." Jason. "About the fundraising. Can we talk? I admire what you've done. Truly." Daniel. "Yes, Daniel. The ex-fiancé who once told me, 'You're smart, Rachel, but be realistic, ideas like yours don't pay bills.' His message? Just 3 words. I was wrong." I placed the phone down beside my black coffee, letting the silence fill my tiny kitchen like music. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was rare peace. The kind of peace that only comes after 2 years of holding your breath in a world that tells you you're not enough. By 9:45 a.m., I walked into the Edinova headquarters, 4 stories of frosted glass and minimalist lines on the edge of Lake Union. Nothing flashy. Just efficient. Every piece of it a reflection of the mission Grant and I had written on a napkin at a diner 2 years ago: build a system smart enough to teach the world's forgotten children. "Hannah," I greeted as our head of communications nearly tripped rushing toward me. "Let me guess, media storm?" She grinned. "CNBC called. They want to film a segment today if you're willing. And the New York Times just added you to their top innovators to watch list. Send CNBC to the Nebula Room. Great lighting in there." As I rode the elevator up to my office, another message from Mom came in. "Your dad is planning to fly to Seattle. He says he wants to understand your work. Not judge, just learn. Can you make time?" I didn't answer. Not out of spite. But because I'd learned the hardest truth in all of this: when someone spends years refusing to see you, they don't just get to walk back in the moment the light gets too bright to ignore. They have to wait. And wait well. The CNBC interview was elegant. A soft setup, whiteboard behind me, no scripted fluff. The final question caught me off guard. Why did you keep all this a secret? Even from your family? I looked right at the camera. Because when you tell people you're building something that's never been done before, they rarely ask how to help. They ask when you'll fail. I needed space to dream without interruption. And silence, I've found, is where vision grows best. That clip was turned into a 30-second reel. Within hours, it had gone viral, 1.2 million views on LinkedIn. Shared by 5 different governors, dozens of educators, and 3 CEOs. I didn't even open half the articles being written about me. I didn't need to. At noon, we received an email from the Washington State Department of Education requesting a closed-door presentation. 2 more district leads followed within the next hour. But just as I began preparing a briefing deck for the Florida pilot launch, Maya, my assistant, knocked lightly. "Rachel," she said carefully. "There's someone in the lobby asking to see you." "Media?" "No," she said, biting her lip. "He says his name is William Turner. Says he used to know you." My stomach turned, not from fear. From memory. William. From college. From the early accelerator days. From that investment meeting where he said, "Rachel's idea is cute, but it won't survive outside of PowerPoint." What did he say when he arrived? He said, and I quote, "I came to apologize before I fall too far behind." Maya raised an eyebrow. "He's wearing Armani, but the suit's wrinkled. Probably been traveling." I exhaled. "Put him in the side conference room. No tea. 5 minutes, max." 2 minutes later, I walked into the glass-walled side room. William stood, hands in pockets, smile still too familiar. "Rachel," he said, as if we were picking up an old friendship. "You look powerful." "I am," I replied, not sitting. "Let me guess, you saw the article?" He chuckled. "That and the CNBC interview." I wanted to say I'm sorry. "For what?" I asked, crossing my arms. "For underestimating you. For dismissing your idea. For saying tech wasn't your lane." I didn't flinch. "Do you know your company submitted a proposal to Edinova 2 weeks ago?" He blinked. "We did. Rejected this morning. Your data models are 2 years out of date. No API readiness. No integration framework." William swallowed hard. "I didn't know you were behind it." "That's your first mistake," I said, walking to the door. "The second was thinking the girl you once mocked wouldn't remember." I opened the door, gesturing toward Maya, who waited outside. "And one more thing," I added over my shoulder. "Around here, everyone books meetings in advance. Titles don't get you past reception. Respect does." He walked out without saying another word. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Sarah Chin, the legendary investor who didn't follow trends, she created them. "I saw someone storming out," she said, setting her Louis Vuitton bag down. "Old ghost?" "Just someone who once thought I didn't belong at this table." Sarah laughed. "Good. They serve a purpose as fuel." I smiled and pulled up the next slide. "Let me show you what Edinova is launching next." Later that afternoon, I was knee-deep in Edinova's upcoming platform rollout, international expansion to 3 school districts in Ontario and Tokyo's Minato ward, when Maya appeared at my door again, her tone careful. "Rachel, I know we usually don't entertain unannounced guests, but it's Brooklyn." I didn't look up. "Tell her to come back with a calendar invite." "She's been downstairs in the staff lounge for over 2 hours, Maya said gently. "She refused to leave. Says she won't go until you agree to see her." 2 hours. That was unlike Brooklyn, she never waited for anything. Not for shoes, not for attention, and definitely not for me. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I closed the file I was reviewing and said, "Bring her to meeting room 3. Should I offer her coffee?" I looked up slowly. No. Coffee is for people we respect. 10 minutes later, I stepped into the room. Brooklyn was seated at the end of the table, barefoot, her designer heels tucked underneath. Her blouse was creased, her usually pristine hair slightly frizzed at the edges. In her hand, she clutched a notebook, not an iPad, not her phone. A notebook. For the first time in years, she looked human. When she saw me, she stood too quickly. "Rachel," she breathed. "You actually came. You've been waiting. That means you need something." Brooklyn's lips parted, then closed again. She looked down. I do. But not just that. I sat across from her without breaking eye contact. "Then say it." She swallowed hard. "Jason's project is failing. They didn't meet enrollment targets. The investors are pulling out." He thought maybe, if they partnered with Edinova or even just got a referral. I raised a hand. "Stop. You're asking for the thing your husband once mocked me for building." She hesitated. "It's not just that. Rachel, I messed up. All of us did. But I want to fix it." I leaned back slowly. "Jason called Edinova a demo product built on a feminist tech fantasy. And you stood beside him. You laughed with him. You nodded along at every dinner where they dismissed me." Brooklyn's voice cracked. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to fight for you." "You didn't have to fight," I replied coldly. "You just had to not stand on the wrong side." She lowered her gaze. "I want to be sisters again." I stood up. "You know what hurt most?" It wasn't the silence. It was knowing that when I needed belief, you stood behind the man explaining why I couldn't possibly know what I was doing. Brooklyn looked up, eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," I said quietly. I turned toward the door. "As for your partnership request, it's not happening. Not now. Maybe not ever." She pushed herself up, voice trembling. "You're really cutting us off?" I paused, then faced her. "It's not about revenge. It's about boundaries. There's a difference between forgiveness and access. You don't get to criticize what I've built and then ask to stand on it." She stayed silent, lips quivering. "You can leave," I said. "Or you can sit here for another 2 hours like before. But I won't be the one holding the door open." I walked away without another glance. When I returned to my office, Maya was already at her desk. "Should I call a car for Ms. Brooklyn?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. She knows her way home. And if she doesn't? Then it's time she learns." For the next hour, I buried myself in prep for a call with Japan's Ministry of Education. But part of me stayed in that glass room, where the sister I once admired looked like she'd finally come to see me not as a problem, but as proof of something she never had the courage to believe in. 1 month after the Business Monthly feature, Edinova's inbox overflowed with new opportunities, university partnerships, government grants, and interest from UNICEF to pilot in South Africa. Our days were packed, our growth chart exponential. And yet, I didn't change a thing about my routine. Wake at 6 a.m. Read for 1 hour. Answer critical messages. No interviews unless pre-approved. No flashy headlines unless mission-aligned. Because I wasn't chasing fame. I was building the future. That Wednesday, Maya entered with an unusually tentative tone. "Rachel, there's someone waiting in the lobby." "Another journalist?" She shook her head. "He says he's your father." I froze. Not because I was surprised. But because I wasn't. Maya continued. "He's been sitting quietly on the leather bench for over an hour. He hasn't spoken to anyone. Just waiting. I pulled up the lobby camera feed. And there he was. Thomas Carter. Former boardroom giant. Head of Carter and Holt Consulting. The man who taught me power came in suits and silence, but who never came to my science fair when I was 10. He sat there now with a worn briefcase in his lap. His coat slightly wrinkled. His shoes dull. His eyes smaller, softer. Send him up, I said. And with that, the man who once thought he had all the answers, walked into my world for the first time. My father stepped into the room like someone entering a museum filled with things he once ignored. Slowly, carefully. Taking everything in. The walls were lined with data projections, charts, international rollout schedules. At the center stood a photo of me, mid-speech at the Berlin EdTech Summit, with the caption, Rachel Carter, leading the global shift in learning intelligence. He walked over to that photo first. For a moment, he didn't speak. Just stared. Then he turned to me. I've read everything, he said. The article. The white papers. Even the blog you published 3 years ago that only had 17 views. I didn't move. I let him keep talking. I didn't know back then. I thought, if you weren't following the family path, you must be lost. He opened his briefcase and placed a stack of printed documents on the table: endnotes, annotated interviews, my old patent application, even a spreadsheet with Edinova's growth trajectory. He'd done his homework. I remember when you were 10, he continued. You built a neural network from clay and Play-Doh for the science fair. I missed your presentation. I had a client meeting in Boston. I thought you'd forget. I didn't, I said, my voice flat. I remember the empty seat in the 3rd row. I saved it for you. He closed his eyes briefly, the pain flickering across his face like a shadow. I came today because I don't want to be the man who missed both the beginning and the breakthrough. I want to understand your world. I didn't soften. I don't need you to catch up. I needed you to believe when there was nothing but blueprints and insomnia. He nodded. That's why I'm here. Not with excuses, with honesty. He pulled out a small ivory card from his pocket and slid it across the table. It was an invitation. Dinner. Friday. 7 p.m. Location, Edinova headquarters. I'd like the family to see what you've built, he said quietly. No speeches. No defense. Just listening. Only those who are willing to learn will be invited. And you'll set the terms. I stared at the card, then slowly met his eyes. If they want to understand me, I said, they'll start by seeing Nova Echo. Our next generation AI learning platform. And no one walks in late. I'll be early, he whispered. As he left, I sat still for several minutes. Not moved. Not broken. Just measuring the weight of what it took for a man like him to show up without power, only presence. 2 days later, I sent the invite list. Brooklyn. Mom. Aunt Ellen. Jason? No. This wasn't a reunion. This was a reckoning. Friday at 7 p.m. sharp, the elevator opened onto Edinova's 3rd floor. A quiet hum filled the glass hallway. No suits. No catered dinners. Just the platform, the data, and the truth. Dad was first. For once, not in a tailored Armani suit, but a simple button-down and khakis. Respectfully plain. Like a man who was trying to unlearn everything he thought he knew. Mom came next. Hair tied back. No perfume. Her eyes scanned the space like it was sacred. Brooklyn walked in, no heels, no designer bag, just that same worn notebook in her hands. A small gesture, but a loud one. No one spoke at first. I gestured toward the demo wall. This is Nova Echo, I said, voice steady. It's an adaptive, multilingual education platform designed to bridge global gaps. Personalized, real-time AI adjustments for every student based on their actual learning patterns, not outdated metrics. I walked them through the student behavior dashboards, the impact assessments, videos from schools in Texas and Vermont showing kids who had once been flagged unteachable now excelling. Mom leaned in when one student on the screen said, "I used to be scared of school. But now the lessons speak my language." Dad asked no questions. He just listened. And finally, I stood in front of the last slide, a list of our upcoming international pilot programs. "We're not just teaching," I said quietly. "We're rebuilding what it means to learn." The silence was profound. Mom was the first to speak. "You didn't just build a company," she said, her voice trembling. "You rebuilt the meaning of belief." My father cleared his throat and reached into his coat pocket. "I've made a decision," he said, looking around the room. "Every Carter and Holt board meeting from this day forward will have an empty chair. A symbol for the voices we once ignored, the minds we overlooked, especially the ones that didn't fit our mold." Brooklyn looked up, eyes wet. "Rachel. I can't erase the things I said. Or didn't say. But if you ever let me in again, it'll be on your terms." I gave no answer. Because this wasn't about words anymore. After they left, I stood alone in the demo room, surrounded by screens still glowing with data, faces, futures. I walked over to the wall where we kept framed photos of our early milestones. At the very end, I hung a new one, me at 10 years old, standing next to that clay neural network. Bright-eyed. Alone. Believing. Because before anyone saw me, I saw myself. And now, they had no choice but to catch up. A week after the family walkthrough at Edinova, something shifted, not in me, but in them. The silence turned from judgment into reflection. The messages I received were no longer laced with suggestions or subtle criticisms. They carried the tone of people who realized they'd missed the train, and were now waiting at the platform, unsure if they were still allowed a ticket. That Friday, as the sun melted into the glass walls of my office, Grant stepped in with a familiar smirk. "Good news or bad first?" he asked, holding 2 folders. "Always bad," I replied. Jason's team launched a last-ditch marketing campaign. They're calling their program SmartBridge, says it matches or exceeds Edinova's outcomes. I raised an eyebrow. Based on what data? Grant flipped open the folder. Their white paper is a Frankenstein of buzzwords. No real testing, no beta partners, nothing peer-reviewed. They want a shadow version of success, I said, turning toward the window. But they're too lazy to earn the light. And the good news? I added. He handed me the second folder. Sarah Chin finalized the investment agreement. She wants to lead the Series D round for Nova Echo's international scale. Her words were, and I quote, "We're not just buying into a company, we're backing a blueprint for the next generation." I smiled. Not because of the money, we didn't need it. But because Sarah was one of the few who never once tried to shrink the vision into something familiar. She saw the edges and asked how far we could go. That night, I stayed late. Everyone had left. The office was dark except for the soft blue glow of the city reflecting off Lake Union. I sat at my desk, going through partnership requests from Johannesburg, Dublin, Mumbai. All asking the same question, "Can your system help us, too?" I was in the middle of reviewing a letter from the head of a rural school district in Nebraska when Maya knocked gently. "Rachel, sorry, one more thing before you call it a night." "Let me guess," I said. "Another magazine interview?" "No," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "It's your mom. She's downstairs." I blinked. "Now?" Maya nodded. "She's not wearing makeup. No driver. Just a coat and a paper bag." A paper bag. That detail alone knocked the air out of my chest. "Bring her to the Zen room," I said. 15 minutes later, I walked in. My mother sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her signature posture, shoulders back, chin high, was gone. She looked like someone who had finally stopped rehearsing her lines. She stood as I entered and handed me the paper bag. "I brought you almond cookies," she said softly. "Same ones. Blue tin." I didn't take them. "Rachel," she continued. "I've been thinking. About everything. About you. About me." I sat, silently. "When you were little, I used to say, 'Don't speak unless you can prove it.' I thought it would make you strong. But I realize now it made you silent. And I mistook that silence for weakness." My throat tightened. But I said nothing. I've spent my life measuring people by their polish. Their brands. Their resumes. I did it to your father. I did it to Brooklyn. And I did it to you. You did worse, I said quietly. You looked at me and saw someone to be pitied. She nodded, pain flickering across her expression. And I was wrong. Because you didn't just survive, you became something so much more than any of us were prepared for. I finally took the tin from her hand and placed it on the table between us. Not as a gesture of peace, but of truth. Something old. Something familiar. Something reopened. She looked at me, her eyes welling. "If you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if you ever decide to let me in again, I won't try to fix you. I'll just sit and learn." I stood up slowly. "You may not realize this, Mom, but what you just said was the first time you ever spoke to me without a script." She smiled through her tears. "That's because for the first time, I'm not trying to teach you anything." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something shifted, like the first crack in a wall finally letting light through. That Sunday, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a frame. A photo of me, age 10, standing in front of my Play-Doh brain project. And beside it, a handwritten note from my dad. "This is going on my desk. Because legacy isn't just about what we build. It's about who we overlooked while building it." For the first time in 20 years, I felt seen. Not as the daughter who wandered too far from the blueprint, but as the blueprint itself. 2 weeks after my family finally saw the truth, I was back in the rhythm that had built Edinova from a fragile idea to a billion-dollar force: early mornings, focused execution, and unwavering silence in the face of noise. But this time, the silence around me felt different. It wasn't isolation. It was intention. I'd learned to make peace with the fact that not every apology deserved a reply. Not every regret deserved re-entry. And most importantly, not everyone who left deserved to witness what I became. On the last Monday of the month, Grant walked into my office holding a polished leather folder with the gold-stamped logo of Innovate TED, the most prestigious global education summit. "They just confirmed it," he said. "You're the keynote. Geneva. Main stage." I closed my laptop. "Time slot? 9 a.m., opening speaker. You're kicking off the entire summit." A long pause. Then I exhaled, smiling softly. "So, this is what it looks like when no one can pretend they didn't see you." Grant grinned. "You ready to shake the table again?" "No," I said. "I'm ready to redesign it entirely." That Friday, the day before I was set to fly out, Mia knocked gently on my door with a perplexed look. Rachel, you're going to want to see this." She handed me a silver tablet with a live feed link already open. I tapped play. It was a public hearing. Jason, in front of a small investor arbitration panel, squirmed under questioning. His company had inflated user metrics. Their lead developer had testified to falsifying demo results. The investors were requesting a full audit and clawbacks on the seed funds. I handed the tablet back. "What should we do?" Maya asked. I shrugged. "Nothing." "Nothing?" Yes, I said. Let him sit with the echoes of the things he laughed at. And just like that, I closed the chapter, not with fire, not with fury, but with full detachment. I didn't need revenge. I'd already won. That night, as I packed for Geneva, I received one last message. Brooklyn. I won't pretend things are fixed. But I've enrolled in an AI in Education certificate program. Not for work. For me. For my daughter. Because I want her to grow up believing in more than designer dreams. Thank you for never letting our silence define you. I read the message twice. Then I replied with just one sentence. Start over, but this time, lead with humility. The next morning, I boarded a private flight chartered by the summit. EdNova's logo, a stylized neural tree, was now being used in multiple education districts across 5 countries. We were finalizing a partnership with UNICEF. And our Canadian integration team had just signed a deal to implement Nova Echo in underserved rural communities. This wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement. The night before the keynote, I stood in my Geneva hotel room, staring out over the lake. In my hand, I held a small clay figurine, a crude brain I'd remade recently, just like the one from my 5th grade project. It reminded me of everything they'd once told me I wasn't. Too soft. Too dreamy. Too naive. Too female. And yet, I had become what they all failed to imagine, because I never needed them to imagine it for me. On stage the next morning, the lights were warm and blinding. The applause was thunderous before I even said a word. I stood there, composed, my voice steady and calm. When I started, I said, I was told to stay small. Be realistic. Follow the template. But what the world calls delusional is often just the early stage of brilliance. I paused. The room was silent. They told me I had nothing. But I had everything that mattered: conviction, resilience, and a truth no one else could see. So I built in silence. And when the time came, I let the results do the talking. The applause returned, louder this time. I smiled. This is for every person who's been doubted in rooms they weren't allowed to speak in. Keep building. The day they realize what you've become, they'll be the ones asking for a seat. I stepped off stage not feeling victorious. Just whole. That evening, as I returned to my suite, there was one final package on the table. No return address. Inside, the framed photo of me at 10 years old, now reprinted in glass, with an inscription etched below it. The girl they almost forgot became the woman they could no longer ignore. I placed it on the nightstand. Then I turned off my phone. Because for the first time in years, there was nothing left to prove and everything left to build. Rachel's story is a reminder that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the greatest victories happen in silence, behind closed doors, with no one watching, until they have no choice but to see. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, let this be your sign. Don't chase their approval. Build until they can't ignore you. Subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more real, raw, and unforgettable stories where the truth hits harder than revenge. And if this story made you feel seen, share it with someone who needs to hear it.